So shalom everyone, and welcome to this special Talking Memory program that opens the Ghetto Fighters House Days of Remembrance. My name is Medin Shachar, and I work at the Ghetto Fighters House as a guide and an educator. I want to welcome our global audience from all over the world, as you can see in the chat box, including friends and colleagues from Holocaust museums, institutions, and centers, academics and students from universities, historians, and our many, many friends who attend our Talking Memory series. A special welcome always to the survivors and their families that are with us today. We want to thank everyone for their support and interest in our programs. I would also like to mention that today in Jewish tradition is Isul Chag, the last day of Passover, the 8th day, reflecting the Jewish people's freedom from bondage. It is also Easter Sunday, so we would like to wish those who celebrate a happy holiday. This week's programs will conclude on Thursday, April 8th at 4:45 p.m. Israel time, when the Ghetto Fighters House will mark the 72nd annual closing assembly of Holocaust Remembrance Day. And because of COVID-19, this program will be virtual, but there will be simultaneous translation to English. The theme of this year's ceremony will be the last descendant, those Holocaust survivors who came alone to Israel, the only place where they could live their lives without fear because the rest of their family perished in the Holocaust. Later, these individuals lost their lives defending the state of Israel and the Jewish people, leaving behind no family and ending their family legacy. Honored guests will include the 6 torchlighters, among them 5 Holocaust survivors and 1 representative of the 3rd generation of survivors, the President of Israel, Reuven Rivlin, and Israel Prize Laureate Miriam Peretz. So please look for information about this special event on our Facebook page. And like I said, I will put a link in our chat box for that. I also want to invite everyone to the next Talking Memory program on April 18th, in 2 weeks, in commemoration of the 78th anniversary of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, and we are honored to host Professor Javi Dreyfus, who will give a talk entitled Warsaw Ghetto: The End, based on her research and latest book. It will focus on the events that led to the uprising and the relationship between the resistance fighters and the Jewish population at large in the ghetto, and how the tens and thousands of Jews in the Warsaw Ghetto became an integral part of the uprising. And now, I'd like to say that for me, it is truly an honor to host the opening event in commemoration of Holocaust Remembrance Day. When I came to Israel in 1983, studying Hebrew in an ulpan on Kibbutz Yagur, our class was brought to the Ghetto Fighters House closing assembly. I will never forget the soldiers standing on the ancient aqueduct that borders the museum's impressive amphitheater, where thousands sat and took part in the largest Holocaust remembrance ceremony in the world. Today, you can't stand on the aqueduct, but it was an amazing sight to see. Many years later, as you all know, I would become a member of the museum's education team and learn about the decisive role the founders of the kibbutz and the museum played in choosing the date for the Holocaust Remembrance Day in the new state of Israel, a day that is now recognized around the world. And of course, their impact on Holocaust remembrance and education. They serve as an inspiration to all of us. And now, I would like to invite our speaker, Liz Elsby, a dear friend and colleague. Liz was born in New York City and raised in Houston, Texas. She immigrated to Israel in 1984 and served for 2 years as an illustrator and graphic designer in the Israeli Defense Forces Education Corps. In 1991, she earned her Bachelor of Design degree from the Bezalel Academy of Art and Design in Jerusalem. Liz worked for many years as a freelance graphic designer, illustrator, and artist. In 2006, led by her lifelong interest in the Holocaust and pre-war Eastern European Jewry, Liz began working for Yad Vashem in Jerusalem as a museum guide and graphic designer. Today, she is a Holocaust educator, lecturer, and a guide to Jewish sites in Poland, Berlin, and Prague. Liz is currently writing and illustrating a children's book about pre-war Jewish culture in Krakow, one of many which she hopes to create in the coming years. And now, without further ado, I'd like to invite Liz. The floor is yours.
So everyone, thank you so much for coming. Sorry we had a rather inauspicious beginning, but we will try and fix it up. And tonight we're going to talk about a really fascinating individual an artist called Maurycy Gottlieb. And not only was he an incredible artist, but he also has a very particular place in Jewish Polish history. And I think that his life is a great life of what if, of possibilities that never were quite met. And what he left us with was a brilliant artistic legacy of a young man who died at the age of 23 only. So we're going to begin with 3 graves tonight. We have one grave in the New Jewish Cemetery in Krakow. Really, at the end of the cemetery, you have to walk all the way through the cemetery, almost to the end. If you didn't know it was in a Jewish cemetery, you would never guess that this was a Jewish man. We have another type of grave. This type of gravestone belongs to a person who has no physical resting place. She was murdered on the way to Auschwitz. And we have the war grave of a young man called Gottlieb. And not only are we going to tell the story of this great artist, Maurycy Gottlieb, we're going to tie all the pieces together, how those belong, how those 3 graves kind of join together. Just want to make sure everyone can still hear me.
Absolutely.
Fabulous. So we're going to begin with Maurycy, who was born in Galicia. For all of you Galicianers out there, I'm a Litvak, so I have less connection to Galicia, in the town of Drohobych. At the time, Drohobych had about 15,000 people. It was half Jewish, half non-Jewish. A very special time also in history, and the history of Poland. At the time, it was part of the Austrian-Hungarian Empire. There are 2 other very famous Jewish artists from this town. One of them is the famous Bruno Schulz, who not only was a great artist, he was also a writer. He murdered in the Shoah, and also Ephraim Moses Lilien, who also happens to be a Maurycy. And he's often considered the great artist of the beginnings of Zionism. And they come from this town that oil had been discovered near the town not long before. And oil at the time was used for lighting neft. It was something very valuable for people's homes. And Maurycy's father manages to make a good family living on the oil that's discovered on their land. Now, this is a very interesting family, and it's a family that kind of like typifies the ferment going on at the time, especially in a place like Drohobych. And they were traditional, they were observant, but they were also what we call maskilim. In other words, not that they were Jewish, but they were very open to what's going on in the world outside of them. And we know that because of the 11 children they had, 4 of them became artists. The parents pushed their sons to become artists. And at this point, before this point, Jewish children there were Jewish artists, but the question was, what nationality were they? Who were they? And to really push your child to become an artist, a Jewish artist. And this is going to raise a little confusion in this young kid. So here we see the oil wells discovered in the town outside of Drohobych. It kind of brings in the oil money. The oil is actually refined in Drohobych. Yeah, the town is about 10 kilometers away, and they bring the oil in. And I want to show you these 3 faces. That's to kind of raise the idea of this confusion. Who is Maurycy Gottlieb in his own mind? He comes from a religious Jewish family, and he starts studying in a cheder, in a religious school, boys' Torah school, religious school for children. He later on goes and studies in a Greek Catholic church. He studies in the language of Polish, but his family speaks to him in German. And later on, he goes to German high schools. So what is he? Is he German? Is he Polish? Is he Jewish? He has these 3 identities kind of going around in his head. With his parents, he speaks German. He knows Polish, but he never speaks it fluently. He understands Yiddish, apparently, but never takes up the language. And he can read classical Hebrew and read Hebrew prayer books. And we even see that confusion in his name. His father called him Moritz, which is the German version of Maris. But he called himself Maurycy, which is the Polish version of Morris, and his Hebrew name was Moshe. And that name we'll see him using that name towards the end of his life, his last great work. But he kind of avoids all of this confusion. This is, you know, am I German? Am I Polish? And he calls himself, when he signs his beautiful works, he signs it M. Gottlieb. So you don't kind of get stuck in that whole, which name is it? And it's not only the name that gets him confused. He is very attracted to the Polish culture. And Polish culture at the time is going through kind of an upheaval since the 1860s. There's a whole upheaval going on in Europe of nationality and the definition of nations. And Poland, that had been divided up, and this was, you know, divided up between these different kingdoms in the century before. There's a national movement, and it's a very special time in Polish history when there was still room to kind of bring Jews into that movement, to be part of the national, the leum, the people. And we see this in Tadeusz Mickiewicz. All my Polish friends, excuse my terrible Polish pronunciation. I work on it so hard that it's still pretty bad. In his classic poem, the last great classic poem written in Europe, called Pan Tadeusz, Janko, the musician, who is features in the poem, and it's a very kind of respected character. And being an incredibly talented little boy, can you imagine this kid is 15 years old and he's studying in different high schools, doesn't quite get along in any of them. His father sends him to school in Lvov. He is studying in the German language, and he says he loved art, he loves history, but that's really all he likes in school. And his teachers right away notice that this is a brilliantly talented kid. And he also says, even if sometimes the kids were mean to me and I felt some anti-Semitism, nobody in the school could draw like me. That was a talent that only I had. Because of this prodigious talent, he is sent to study in Vienna. And I want you to think about what this meant. Here we have a little boy from the provinces, little Jewish kid, and he's being sent to the seat of the Austrian-Hungarian Empire, to Vienna, like the seat of culture. And he has the opportunity to paint there. And they notice what an incredible talent he is. And he goes to the art department that doesn't really exist anymore, but they once had a whole branch of art school dedicated to historical paintings. Now, I'm a B'Tzalel graduate. I studied in the Art Academy here in B'Tzalel. We didn't have a historical painting department. But in those days, before TV, before movies, artists would paint these incredibly huge canvases with figures that were almost the same size as the people who came to observe them. And really, through these artworks, you would get a piece of, you would feel you were part of history. And he joins that department. He gets a very academic classical training in painting. And in 1873, Vienna hosts a kind of a world fair. And it's at this world fair, when he's going to the different pavilions, seeing the different cultures, that he goes into the pavilion from Poland, and he is bowled over by the works of the great Polish artist, Jan Matejko. And he sees these works telling the story of his people, the story of Poland, the people that he is part of, even though he's a Jew. And he's so blown away. And one of the paintings that really gets to him is this one. And for some reason, we can't see the title, but it is, I'll tell you, it is, I'll tell you the title here, The Fall of Poland, which shows Delegate Tadeusz Rejtan, that's the man on the floor in front of the king. The country's fallen into Russian, Prussian, and Austrian hands, while other political leaders look on, and the king, impatient and helpless, steps away from his throne. This moment when Poland loses its nationality, and here we have Tadeusz Rejtan on the floor, ripping his chest open, and you can imagine this young kid standing there, jaw agape, saying, "This is what I want to show. This is my identity. I want to study with this artist." And he goes back to Krakow. He goes back to Galicia, leaves the bright lights of the big city and the culture of Vienna behind. Jan Matejko takes him in as a student, and he's quite a talented student, a brilliant student, actually. And he writes these words, Maurycy Gottlieb. He says, when I attended the School of Art, my heart was filled to the brim with love of painting, and my soul was overcome with all the things of beauty and loftiness that surrounded me, so much so that I believed, all too hastily, that the wall separating me from all other peoples had fallen, that the whole world was open to me, that I was a brother and a friend to all mankind, that nothing distinguishes us from one another, but all of us share the sons of one Father, one God has created us all. What an idealist! What a romantic! What a romantic way of looking at the world. And unfortunately, the reality will be different. He paints this portrait of himself at the age of 18 as a Polish nobleman. What identity is he trying to find? Jewish kid from Drohobych, and here, a Polish nobleman. Not only a Polish nobleman, dressed one of the insurgents in the war in the 1860s, and he's actually wearing the hat of those insurgents, and he's got this beautiful classic outfit on with the belt and the furs, and here he is, this boy, this Jewish boy, who sees himself as part of the Polish nobility. He says, I'm a Pole and a Jew, and I wish, God willing, to work for both. He not only paints himself as the Polish nobility, he also paints his sister. Here's one of his sisters, his sister Anna, which he paints also in 1874, also dressed in this costume. This is a Jewish woman from Poland in the 1870s, also dressed as part of a member of the Polish nobility. And this is a painting which unfortunately has been lost. And of the 300 paintings, I want you to think the main output of this young man's work, beginning the 1870s, most of that we have is things that he created in the 1872, 73 until 1879. It's not a long period. We have about 300 of his works that survive. So many of it has been lost. But this is a massive painting. And all we have left is a picture. But it shows a Livonian order pays homage to King Zygmunt August in Pozval in 1557. So learning at the feet of the master, Jan Matejko, he's also drawing these huge pictures, commemorating and talking about the life of Poland. Well, something raises its ugly head, and that is anti-Semitism. And for such a young, idealistic young man, who had grown up in a small town where there was a majority of Jewish people, but who had been exposed to people who were not Jewish, had felt anti-Semitism, but now he's in this wave of ecstasy of being this artist among artists and being accepted as an artist. He's brought back to earth with a bang when he realizes that even in the art school and even among his art friends, anti-Semitism is creeping in. It's crushing for him. And he writes, how I would like to eliminate all the prejudices against my poor co-religionists. How I would like to extirpate the hatred of this poor people. In other words, the Jewish. How I would like to bring about the reconciliation of Poles and Jews, for the history of both is a history of suffering. Well, he kind of gives up on Krakow after a while. Goes by way, you can see here with the Academy in Krakow, and I can tell you as a student, someone who had been an art student many years ago in Bezalel, that one thing most art students don't like is the one art student who is the as you will, the teacher's pet, the incredibly talented one who's getting all of the recognition. That's pretty much Maurycy Gottlieb, and he gets a lot of pushback and hatred from his classmates, which takes the form of anti-Semitism. And he goes to Vienna, spends some time in Vienna, doesn't get along in Vienna, goes back to Drohobych, and then goes to Munich. And in Munich, a few incredible things happens in his life. Thing number one, he starts to read the great history of the Jewish people by Goethe. And this is one of the sweeping history of the Jewish people told in a very beautiful, not academic, very exciting and very, very, what's the word? I can't think of the word, very emotional history of the Jewish people, setting them as a people, setting them not just as a story of collections of this rabbi and that rabbi, but as a people who have a place in world history. And he's blown away by this. He understands that he, instead of being an object that people could make fun of and someone that you need to hide your identity and someone who wants to kind of get rid of their identity, he becomes even prouder of being Jewish. Another thing he sees at the time in periodicals in Germany are a lot of very anti-Semitic images. And for some reason, seeing them printed and so ubiquitous in the German papers really stings him. And he thinks, how could I portray, how could I show the world this is not who we are? We are not these terrible caricatures that I see all over. We're not the snide remarks people make in this, high society, the way that we're looked down upon, the stereotypes. As a Jew, we're so much more than that. And he sets about, that's going to be his mission, to kind of elevate the Jewish experience and the Jewish people to something real, something sympathetic, something that would really show what real Jews are like. And he says something else in Munich that kind of blows him away. In one of the museums in Munich, he sees the paintings of Rembrandt. And paintings of Rembrandt at any museum, at any time in history, are incredibly moving. This young 20-year-old kid, they blow away. He's so moved. And the inner light that Rembrandt has. And the closeness of the subjects that Rembrandt kind of, brings in. And another thing is Rembrandt shows the Jews in a very sentimental and very loving light. And we know he must have seen paintings like this. This is the Jewish Bride, painted in 1665 to 1669. It's the loving way the husband is looking at the wife, the hand gestures, the warm lights, the glowing lights from within. These are something that this young man is kind of sucking in, and he wants to emit, it influences, he wants to paint something in a similar vein. Another picture by Rembrandt is the Jewish Bride from 1641. Beautiful woman looking frankly at us, catching us in her. He starts to draw pictures, thank you very much, helper, in a Jewish vein. He says that, if this artist who wasn't Jewish can draw Jews in such a sympathetic light, then he can too. And his work takes a change, and he starts to portray Jews and Jewish experiences. But we talked about his identity crisis and who he is as a Jew and as a human being and as an artist. And we go from that painting he makes as a young man at the age of 18 in 1874 to this painting he paints of himself as Ashaver, the wandering Jew. And in the connotation of the wandering Jew, the Jew who historically has been kicked from pillar to post, who nobody wants, we kind of see this rendition of that wandering Jew as himself. You can see the influence of Rembrandt here, the beautiful colors, and the inner light, the intense insideness, for want of another word, of the character itself. This is not someone who only wants to show you his technical skill. He wants you to contemplate what's happening inside of his mind. Where is he as a human being? What is he feeling? How does he see himself? Notice as the portrait, we don't see, he's not looking at us. We have to look at him. We have to kind of regard him. We have to think, what is he thinking? What is he feeling? And why does he see himself as the wandering Jew? The Jew who has no place. Before, he's showing himself as the Polish nobleman. Now he's a Jew who has no place. And also building on Shakespeare, on Rembrandt, and he shows us these beautiful portraits of Jews, not Jews as curiosities, not Jews as some kind of separate, weird ethnic group, but Jews as human beings, normal Europeans who may dress a little different, but have beautiful inner light. So here we have a Jewish bride, dressed us a little different as the bride. We have a drawing he makes of a Torah scribe, and you can look at the lights around here. You can even see here the word Gottlieb, a drawing of a man kind of in ecstasy of writing. He's swept into it. As an artist, Gottlieb can understand that when you really get into a piece of work and you're throwing your whole body into it, and you have a sofer, that's what they do. They kind of throw their whole being into it. He captures that. The joy of a Jewish wedding, the picture he never finished, but the rituals of the Jewish wedding, beautiful rituals. He wants to show us that in a positive light. And he's also taking pictures of some of the great works of writers and kind of righting a wrong. So everyone knows the story of the Merchant of Venice and Shylock and Jessica. And Shylock is one of the most hated characters in literature, this terrible Jew, this epitome of the horrible actions of Jews, you know, a trickster and a terrible person. And his daughter Jessica marries a non-Jew just to kind of get away from him. And traditionally he's shown as this very stereotypical way. But Gottlieb chooses to draw him in another way. And in this intensely, really this beautiful picture, we see the loving relationship of the father and the daughter. And even though she's leaving the fold, and even though she's leaving her people, and she's kind of what they used to say, marrying out, he still has enough love and affection for her. Even after she's stolen from him and kind of broken his heart, he still has this beautiful moment of a father and daughter. And I think it's something that's so special in the works of Maurycy, this kind of tenderness you'll see in them. Unlike the big historical works where you see a lot of blood and violence, and he's looking for the inner people, the inner human beings. And you see that beautifully in this painting. I just want to show you a close-up. By the way, this painting is lost. There is a second painting very similar to this one that his brother Marcin did in the 1880s that he did from a copy. But this is not the original. I think someone took a photograph of the original and painted over it. But it's not the original. The original is lost. And you can see how huge the original was. This is actually when it was put on display, and it won international awards. And standing here on the right, quite proudly, are two of his sisters. And here's Gottlieb standing here on the far left. We don't know who the individual is standing next to the canvas. But you can see how huge, again, I talked about these historical the paintings where you kind of feel part of them. Another historical theme he does is Uriel Acosta and Judith Van Straten. This is based on the novel by what's it called? I can't think of the word in English. He was in Uriel Acosta was a convert who converts to Judaism and then has this very tragic love affair with Judith Van Straten. This is according to the play by, I can't find the name of the artist, the playwright, excuse me, I'm mumbling, and eventually is humiliated in front of the Jewish community of Amsterdam and commits suicide. But this is also, it's the question of what those who are outside of the fold, those who don't quite belong. Here's a man who wants to be Jewish and feels his whole soul is Jewish, and he's kind of kicked out because he's not Jewish enough. But here he has this relationship with Judith Van Straten, who also doesn't quite fully accept it because of his religion, because of their religious differences. But in the painting also, the tenderness between he and this figure, and we'll talk about the woman in these pictures in a minute, is very palpable. It's also kind of in the spirit of the times, kind of staged, very theatrical. He himself writes to his sister and tells her how much he loves the theater and how influenced he is by the theater. He also strives to show us Jews as, you know, acceptable Europeans, as everyday Europeans who just happen to be Jewish. This man, Ignacy Koranda, was his patron in Vienna, who was a very good man to him. He gets him, helps him go study in Rome. And he shows him as a very dignified man in his late 60s. Again, also kind of in the same vein as Rembrandt, with this very black shirt and this inner light coming from him, this warm face that regards us. And I could also tell you as an artist, when you create a painting, the way you create the eyes and how those eyes kind of have a dialogue with the person who's looking at you, at the picture you create. You don't move away from this quickly. You stand in front of it and you look into his eyes and he looks into your eyes and you have a little dialogue with this painting of Ignacy. The same thing with this beautiful painting of a young Jewish woman. She's not looking at us, but the inner beauty. This is not a flat person. This is a person of substance who has thoughts and feelings and emotions. And he draws her not only in the same vein as Shakespeare with all of these layers of varnishes, but also the contrast of the blacks and the greens. What he's actually doing here is he's experimenting and moving towards an art movement, which is going to go on without him, which will eventually be not expressionism, impressionism. He didn't live long enough, but his artwork is beginning to go towards the end of his life in that direction. Here we have his sister, Anna, the one he portrayed before as also a Polish nobleman. His sister doesn't have the same dilemmas that he does. She feels very comfortable in European society. She's a European. She's also a Jew, but she sees herself European first. She doesn't grapple with the same insecurities, the same questions of identity that he does. And he draws her in that way. She's looking to the side. She looks very proud. She looks very sure of herself, unlike the portraits he makes of himself. He also wants to show the non-Jewish people, listen, we're one group humanity. We're not different peoples. We are all one. We all come from the same God. We should be striving towards unity. We should be striving towards peace. We should be striving towards understanding. And the man who came to give you that message, he seems to be telling them, was Jesus. And don't forget that Jesus, this man of peace, was also a Jew. And he wants to bring the Jewish people to Poland, that they should understand and see that their religion is based on this Jewish man who never realized he was starting a new religion, who was Jewish to the end. And he makes these massive paintings. And this one was actually on display in the Israel Museum, on loan from the museum in Warsaw, in Poland. I think it's in Warsaw. And when you stand in front of it, it's at least, it's almost 3 meters high. It's massive. And let's look at this little briefly at some of the images we see here. We see that it's not finished. He never had a chance to finish it in his lifetime. We believe he started painting it from 1877 to about 1878. And if you look at Jesus, we're looking at a very Jewish Jesus. This is not a man who has some kind of Nordic blonde look. He's very Semitic looking, very, what's the word? Someone who comes from this region. There's a word, I can't think of it right now, sorry. And he's wearing what appears to be a talit wrapped around him. When we look closer, we see that there is this light here, which may be something like the nail to me, the eternal flame in the synagogue. We see that most of the people painted here, and he does this again and again and again, are based from people from his own family. None of them are really engaging with Jesus. None of them are really looking, listening to every word and hanging on every word. There's this one man at the front who's kind of got his arms raised to him, but none of them are really, spellbound by what he's saying. Here we also see a little container with scrolls in it. By the way, you also see here, it looks like a Torah scroll. And here he also paints himself. And here he is, Maurycy Gottlieb, not quite looking at Jesus, but very affected by his words, very saddened by his words. Maybe he's thinking, listen, as much as you came to preach and teach the world to love and to be the man of life, people aren't listening to you. People aren't hearing what you have to say. There's still hatred in the world. There's still anti-Semitism in the world. There are still terrible things happening. But he's the one in the picture who's so moved, and he's kind of looking off in the distance, very sad. We'll see the same picture, the same pose again in his most famous painting, which we will come to very soon. And one more portrait of himself. This is Rembrandt van Rijn, 1628. Look at the chiaroscuro, sorry for the terrible pronunciation, a self-portrait. And we know that he must have seen that and been very influenced by that, because here's another portrait he makes of himself. Very interesting portrait because we can't see his eyes. We can't see, what he's thinking, but he paints himself smiling. And this is one of the only times I think he's one of the only paintings he ever shows himself smiling. And there's a reason for the smile. And the reason is this young lady. Her name is Laura Henschel Rosenfeld. At that time, she was just Laura Rosenfeld. who is a beautiful young lady from Vienna. She is the youngest daughter of, I think, 8 brothers, 7 brothers. Very, very spoiled, very loved, very protected. And she was originally from but was then Czechoslovakia, today Czech Republic. And wasn't Czechoslovakia then either. It was the Czech land. Sorry for my Czech friends out there. And anyway, her father dies, and she and her mother moved to Vienna. And it's in Vienna that she meets Maurycy Gottlieb. And you can imagine this is a very strange attraction, because here she is, this rich young woman. And the attraction for him is she is, first of all, very beautiful, but she kind of embodies all of these things that he admires so much. She's Jewish, but she's very European. She's very cultured. She's very intelligent. Not intelligent, she's very educated. She's accepted. She's part of this whole European scene as a Jew. And she must have seen in him the interesting, fascinating artist who's so incredibly intense with his big eyes, who comes from that little town in the East, and he's totally crazy in love with me. And he was absolutely mad over her. Maurycy Gottlieb kept diaries, and we have this letter that he sends to her, letters and diaries. And he writes to her, "My own Laura, my goddess on earth, beloved one, my sweet little kitten. I feel that something unique exists between us. Without you, I can no longer live, for you are the very soul of my existence. My dear little baby. Oh, I do cause you so much pain. My love for you is so tremendous, so wild in its intensity that I lack the power to control it." Wow, that's a lot for an 18-year-old girl to handle. And she kind of plays along. And by the way, can you recognize the picture on the right? Yes, that is from the painting of Oriol da Costa. And the beautiful picture of Judith is none other than his love, Laura. And she writes some little kittenish letters. "No letter arrived from you today. I have ever inflicted on you such pain. Am I guilty of ruining something? Why must I wait so in vain? From the depths of my heart, I send so many blessings and wishes. Please consider my pain and my sorrow a necklace of greetings with kisses." Wow. Well, she starts to get a little bored. You know, she's an 18-year-old girl. She's very, very cosseted and very spoiled, has these adoring brothers, has a mother who doesn't like this wild artist type, has a mother who says, "He's not good enough for you. What I want for you is a good established Jewish businessman who can keep you happy and can keep you, you know, in the lifestyle you deserve." And they have a very fervent correspondence, and he often sends pictures of what he's working on, and she sometimes sends very cruel remarks. So when he sends her this picture, there's this copy, this gorgeous picture he makes that wins awards, all she can say is, "You drew me and I look fat." And he writes her, "Do you really think I would draw you looking fat? If I drew you looking fat, you would look like this." And here's an actual drawing he makes of her. And then Oriol wouldn't want Judith anymore. And your Oriol loves you and wants you to know that you are not fat. Letters like this go back and forth, but she starts to get colder and colder to him. And finally, the letters start coming less frequently. He's distraught, and he tries to make one last effort. He makes this beautiful picture, this beautiful portrait of her, and sends it to Laura and her mother. Now I want you to look at this picture. There's something very different about this picture than the other portraits he paints. She's looking right at us. And I could also tell you, when an artist makes a portrait, you often stand in front of your portrait and look in the eyes, and they look in yours, look in the eyes, look in yours. You have this dialogue with it. And he draws her with this kind of almost haughty expression. Her eyebrows are raised. Her little red mouth is kind of pouty. She's looking right in the eyes of him. And he writes to his mother, "I'm sending you this painting, and I kiss the lips and the eyes." So he feels this real connection with this Laura that he's painted. But alas, her mother instructs her to send all the letters back and to tell him that she's met another man. And they already have someone kind of waiting in the wings who they're going to fix her up with. And she sends the letter back to him. He's absolutely dejected. He is heartbroken. I've been hurt with the most dreadful horror in a man's life. I almost lost my mind, and the bell tolled 12 times, echoing in the far distance. So Laura, who appears in some of his most famous and beautiful works, has yet one more beautiful painting to come into. And by 1878, he had gone back to Krakow. And in Krakow again, that same anti-Semitism that he had found before comes back, and he's so hurt by it. And one of the students who he's painting with, one of his acquaintances, says to him, "Do not forget who you are and what you are, a lowly Jew, hated by all, a miserable worm, whom all have trampled on since time immemorial. And even today you can be freely humiliated without having any right to retaliate." When I heard this terrible mockery, which I had long since forgotten, my blood boiled, my heart felt a horrendous pain, and all of my people's sufferings were awakened in me and would not be silent. Then I swore to devote my whole life and strength to my downtrodden people. And he says that that was one of the inspirations for one of the greatest pieces of art in Jewish history. And it's the painting he creates in 1878, and it's called Jews Praying in the Synagogue on Yom Kippur. The wonderful thing about this painting is from whichever direction you come from, if you want to look at it from a very religious direction, if you want to look at it from a very symbolic direction, if you want to look at it from a direction of art, kind of academic art history, it gives you all of these beautiful places to discuss and talk about. So I'm going to come from the kind of mystical connection, because there's something very mystical about this painting. I'm going to go into it and look at it. When we see it, what we see are Jews on the most sacred day of the Jewish year, on Yom Kippur. Also, the day of the Jewish year for Jews in the diaspora, that most Jews actually go to synagogue. They talk about Yom Kippur Jews, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur Jews. Many Jewish people of the less observant class will go to synagogue, usually only for the high holy days, and he catches this kind of supreme moment. How do we know it's Yom Kippur? Well, when you stand in front of the painting, which is massive, it's in the Tel Aviv Museum of Art, one of the treasures of Israel, and this little Siddur here, he writes a little instruction. This is a Siddur for Yom Kippur. We also see here a shofar, which means it's probably near Neilah, probably near the end of Yom Kippur. But when you look at it closely, you get a surprise, because Maurycy Gottlieb himself appears 3 times in this painting. And not only that, his beloved Laura appears 2 times in this painting. And as an artist, you can almost feel him being swept away, like with what he's doing, totally involved in it, because he says this: "It was not with paints that I created this picture, but with my life's blood. When I painted this picture, I felt the spirit of utter sadness descend upon me. In my inner eye, I perceived the spirits arising from their graves. I saw my relatives who died long ago encircling me, and their dead eyes looking deep inside of me, pleading, 'Bring us back to life.' I drew them from memory or from old pictures that rose in my mind, and afterwards I painted myself among them." So he's drawing his family, he's drawing his relatives. He feels them penetrating them with his eyes. He's feeling with every brushstroke that his life's blood is mingling with the paints. And he puts himself with them. And one of the greatest regrets that Maurycy Gottlieb had in his life is when he was a kid studying in school. On Yom Kippur, he went to school and he was painting with his classmates. And he was so swept up in the art and the painting on the day that he actually ate some sausage. And when he came home, he was utterly distraught. He was so embarrassed and so full of shame. And he writes about that as being one of the, I came home and I just cried. So in the middle of the painting, we see the first depiction, Maurycy Gottlieb. There he is in the middle of the painting. He's kind of leaned over. His head is being cradled in his hand. He's looking at us, but not at us. And he's not really deeply in prayer, but on this day of Cheshbon Nefesh, when you like self-reckoning, when you reckon and have a accounting, self-accounting, he's very deeply involved with his own thoughts. And we can see in the picture, there are three representations of him. Here he is as an adult in the present. Here he is as a young boy, dressed up, and we see the painting, these beautiful way he renders the clothing. This young boy who's got a machzor, his prayer book open, and it says there, Melech in Hebrew. We see him here as a young boy entering the Jewish world as a bar mitzvah boy. We see him leaning on his father for strength. All those paintings we saw of fathers, of the Shylock, you know, kind of cuddling his daughter, and the pictures he paints of Rembrandt, and the husband who's so tenderly touching his wife. We see that tenderness in his relationships with his family, with his parents as well. And here he is. And if you look here, there are two renditions of Laura. One of them, Laura, again, is looking here. And if you look in his prayer book here, it's a closed book. Laura's hand, let me see if I can get a close-up. I think there, by the way, here, how do we know, by the way, I'll get back to the book in a minute, that this is Maurycy? They both have these little medallions, each one with a Jewish star and each one with a Mem Gimel, standing for Maurycy Gottlieb. So that's him. And here he is again with his father. Here are the two hands with the books. At this point, it's a done deal. Their relationship is a closed book. And she's kind of looking at him from across the shul. And he's got his head down in despair, you know, deep in his own thoughts. She's also whispering with the mama. And the mama's kind of looking out at the audience. The mama is the one who kind of made everything happen. She was the one who was telling her daughter, he's not good enough for you. He's not the person for you. He's just an artist. He's a schlepper. And here she is whispering with the mama. And the picture, this whole idea that you would paint your relatives and that you would paint so many things that were so important to you, and the whole way that this Renaissance triangle that you'll see with Madonnas, you know, of funneling prayers up and funneling thoughts up, and the relatives and his own, you know, head deep in his hand. It's very, very touching. But there's something about this painting that makes it even more almost, what's the word, metaphysical. And that's what's written on the Torah. Because on the Torah, it says this: Torah found donated in memory of the soul of the late honored teacher Moshe Gottlieb. May the memory of the righteous one be a blessing. And it's 1878, the Hebrew letter, 1878. He writes like an epitaph to himself on the Torah scroll, kind of seeing his own death. That's one way you can interpret it. And many art historians have. And his father's so upset. How can you do this? How can you write this? That he has him painted off. But Maurycy paints it back on again at a later date. So in actuality, you see four visions of him here: child, bar mitzvah boy, young man. We see him wearing this very unusual robe that is not your usual talit, which may be kind of connecting him back to ancient Judaism, this kind of almost biblical robe, setting him apart. And the boy, who looks like he may be almost leaving the synagogue. And again, at this time, it's a time in history where many Jewish people that are leaving Orthodox Jewry and are becoming part of the Maskilim, becoming part of even the assimilationists. And here he is almost leaving, and yet the word melach, king, he writes this, Maurycy Gottlieb. He says, oh, where's the words? This may happen that unwittingly and against our will, we are forced to heed a bat kol, a heavenly voice, which like a ruler will command us, and we are subjugated in action and desire, facing the will of its angels, those who carry out its assignments. And maybe that melech, king, this holy voice, maybe that's what's keeping him rooted here and keeping him part of this tradition. And when you see the picture in its large form, rooting everything in the middle is the Torah scroll. Well, one of the last portraits he paints in 1879, he's not portraying himself as anything but an artist. Here he is, an artist in European dress. Again, we can't look into his face, kind of lost in contemplation. And very shortly after this painting is created, he gets word that he at that point was seeing someone else, but he gets word that the love of his life, Laura Rosenfeld, is now Laura Henschel Rosenfeld. She married a man called Leo. And 2 weeks after receiving this news, in July 1879, he dies. Now, we're not quite sure how. What they say is that he had a severe infection of his throat, that he had been wandering the streets of Krakow distraught, got sick, and just let himself slip away. There are some who say he committed suicide. We'll never know the exact reason, but his life ends shortly after at the age of 23. Now, we're going to go back to his grave, because there's the grave again that I showed you at the beginning. And for a man who's so conflicted and confused and doesn't know who he is, it is in the Jewish cemetery, but what it says on it is in Polish. And when you translate it, he says, Maurycy Gottlieb, a poet and an artist, and the dates of his life. And it says he wrote beautiful songs with colors. To his brothers, whom he loved, his death was untimely. The world will cherish his memory, his countrymen. So who were his brothers? Who were his countrymen? After he died, everyone wants him. Maurycy, Polish name. Moshe, Jewish name. He's a Jew, he's a Pole, even in death, he never quite got the singular identity. Now we're going to go back, because there are 2 other graves that we talked about, 2 other gravestones. And one of them is the beautiful Laura. Laura goes on to marry Leo Henschel, and they become a very successful couple living in Berlin. Berliners who just happen to be Jewish, and they have 4 children. When he dies in 1909, she becomes a renowned educator in Berlin. She starts to work with the children of delinquent children. She opens up a home for them. She's remembered as Mother Henschel. She goes on to have 4 of her own children. Here's the mama who made all the problems. And here she is as an 80-year-old woman. Well, it is Yom HaShoah coming up. And of course, this story has to have a very tragic ending for a woman living in Germany, living in Europe at the time. When the Nazis came to power, she left everything she had created her whole life in Berlin, and they run away to Holland. And as an 86-year-old woman who was already blind and almost paralyzed, living in an old age home, she is caught by the Nazis. She's marched, she's taken out, she's taken to jail. She's then taken to Westerbork, put onto a cattle car, heading up to Auschwitz. And we believe this frail 86-year-old woman died on the cattle car to Auschwitz. Some of the words that she says, and she wrote things. She wrote memoirs. We have her writings. Some of them, most of them were destroyed. She says this: they say that all men are equal. No canvas is any different from another. That is certainly true. But the pictures each man paints on the canvas of his life, those are not the same. Laura Henschel Rosenfeld. And till the end of her life, her granddaughter, Batsheva Sheflan from Kibbutz Hefzibah, remembers that her grandmother talked about Maurycy Gottlieb and talked about this first, her fiance from so long ago, and that he killed himself over love for her. And here is her tombstone. She doesn't have a memorial like Maurycy has. Her memorial is somewhere on the way to Auschwitz. And here's the page of testimony filled out by her granddaughter. Now, we're going to get to that last gravestone now. Maurycy Gottlieb, as I said, had many brothers. 3 of them became artists. One of them was the artist Leopold Gottlieb, who was a contemporary of Rothko. And he is part of the Paris School. He leaves Poland and he goes and lives in Vienna. But as a German, as a Pole, excuse me, he feels very close to Poland. Remember, we talked about these connections to their homeland. And when World War I comes, he joins the Polish Legion, the 1st Brigade, and he becomes the artist of the Legion, and he draws these really beautiful portraits of Polish soldiers. They are so beautiful that they're actually put on display. A book is made out of them. After that, by the way, he also taught in my alma mater in Bezalel from 1910 to, I believe, 1916, 1917. Then he goes back, 1906 to 1916 or whatever. From there, he goes back to Poland. When the war ends, he goes to France. He's part of the Paris School. He dies in 1934, but his wife and 2 daughters become part of the underground in France. And his wife, Orly, is caught. She's interrogated. She's sent to Drancy, and from Drancy, she is sent to Auschwitz and murdered. His daughter, Chava, who has a non-Jewish ID card, is also part of the underground. She's also caught. She's interrogated by Klaus Barbie, but because she doesn't have, she has a fake ID, she's not recognized as being Jewish. She actually gives testimony at his trial in 1987, and here she is giving testimony. But she gives birth to the love of her life, a little boy called Yoel. Yoel, who was, she comes to Israel in 1947, again, a case of someone trying to find their identity. And all of those of you who are immigrants from somewhere to somewhere, and I made Aliyah to Israel the same year Madine did in 1984, never quite fit in 100% here, never quite fit in 100% there, just like Maurycy and just like his aunt here, because she doesn't really fit into the kibbutz. She goes to kibbutz Sdot Yam. She's a single mother. She goes back to France to her sister to have her little baby, Yoel. She never talks about his father. But she's a very different culture. She's very European. She loves to play the piano. She loves art. She doesn't really fit into the whole kibbutz scene. Leaves the kibbutz and goes to Jerusalem. Her little boy goes to Boyer High School. My daughter Iris is also a graduate of Boyle. Kids remember him as being this talented, beautiful young man who loves poetry, who loves animals, he loves art, very talented artist. And when he's in the army, he goes into the tank corps. He wants to be a veterinarian, but after the army, he goes to the Technion. He wants to be an artist. And when the war, the Yom Kippur war breaks out, he's again called to be a tank commander. And here he is, Yoel Gottlieb. And very sadly, he falls in the war, the Yom Kippur War. With that, they say it was the end of the Gottlieb line. Now, what's interesting is there was another talk on Maurycy Gottlieb, and lots of Gottlieb descendants, 2 ladies, in fact, said we're descendants of the Gottlieb family, and started saying one was one of
them is entering right now.
Oh, wonderful! So great. So I'm not sure if it's quite the end of the story. But he's still what we think of as Netzer Acharon. And here's the memorial. I didn't actually put it on there. I thought I did. Netzer Acharon, the last remnant of the Gottlieb family. But I'm happy to say apparently there are more Gottliebs. And of all these ladies, and I heard you talking and speaking at another, almost all of them have some connection to art, to creating, which is amazing that line couldn't be stopped. So 3 graves, 3 different stories, 3 people who, one looking for his identity, one very comfortable with her identity as a German Jew, one as an Israeli Jew, each one with a different grave. But they have one thing that ties them all together, and that is Yom Kippur. And why is that? Well, Gottlieb, of course, paints this beautiful painting of Yom Kippur. His love, Laura Hanschel Rosenfeld, appears in this painting of Yom Kippur. And his nephew dies in the Yom Kippur War. And Chava, his mother, also died on Yom Kippur. in the 80s. So that is the story of Maurycy Gottlieb. I hope you have a chance to see his incredible artwork. I don't care who you are. You can't stand in front of his work and not be moved. Not only moved, but stand there and look at the details and the warmth emanating from the painting. And when you understand the words that he felt that this was his family and that he painted it with his own blood, it becomes even more mystic and even more beautiful. So thank you, everyone. I wish I could see you all. Let me see if I can figure out how to do it.
If you get out of share screen, you can see everybody.
All right, there we go.
Ah, there we are. Hi.
Hi, I can't see you, but I'm going to click the exit. I'm clicking. All right, let me see if I can see you. Yay. Okay.
So first of all, Liz, thank you so much. What a fascinating talk. And so many people are writing that in the chat.
Wonderful.
Really,
sorry, we're kind of banged up in the middle. I kind of lost my way in the middle.
That's fine. You know what? It didn't bother anybody at all. Actually, there was one question. I'm going to ask people again if you have any questions. One person was asking about the robe that Maurycy was wearing in the painting for Yom Kippur. Could it be reminiscent of Joseph and his multicolored?
Yeah, that's wonderful, because one of the great things about art, and again, when he made this painting, he didn't say, listen, the only way you can understand my painting is these guidelines. There's no other way to understand it. And I think that's a wonderful interpretation. People interpret in different ways. And I can tell you as an artist that lots of times you leave things open for people to interpret. Again, he's like in the schwung, he's painting and he's seeing his relative and he's making himself in this robe. It could be Joseph's coat. It could be a connection back to the ancient, Jews. It could be setting him apart.
Exactly.
I think that's a wonderful interpretation.
He says maybe it was also kind of a reminder of his fellow students being jealous of him that you talked about. So it's a very interesting.
That's an amazing comparison.
Yeah, I like it too, actually. There's another question. Is there any information that his parents were artists?
From what I've read, and I've looked and I've read the book by Mendelssohn. Ezra Mendelssohn wrote like kind of one of the definitive biographies of him. We don't know that much about his parents. Also, there weren't a lot of photographs of his family. We know more about Laura's family because Laura lived till 1943 and was pretty talked to her granddaughter Batsheva, and Batsheva also told about the family. And there was also another lovely lady who got on last time who's connected to Batsheva's family or knew Batsheva, and also told stories that she had told. But from what I know, and if anyone else knows, please inform me, because it's wonderful learning from other people as well. I don't know that much about his family, his parents, if they were artists. But they encouraged art in their children, which is pretty cool in the 50s and 60s. It shows that the ferment that these people were living in, that be Jewish, be an artist, go for it. You have talent, you can do so many things, which is kind of is a testimony to the times that we're living in that place, in Drohobitz.
Wonderful. So actually someone is writing that they were captured by Gottlieb's story. And Elizabeth says that she is a Polish Jewess living in Italy, and she feels so close to his searching for identity. I think we can all, those immigrants among us can.
All of us who are immigrants, I think, can really understand that. Especially when you're not of the same majority religion as everyone else.
Carolyn, hi Carolyn, is asking if there are any sketchbooks that were that survived, sketches and sketchbooks.
Well, from what I've looked for, and I didn't want to overload you, but I know that the Zhich, the Jewish Historical Museum in Poland, which has a fantastic database, you can look for some of his sketches in there. I think he made them around the 1870s. Of the 300 known works, there's like 300 works of his that still exist. I think 100 of them are paintings, and the rest are sketches and drawings. So you could find some of them online. There was a retrospect show of his in Poland in the 1930s, and you could still find the catalog. But I looked in all kinds of strange places. The Zhich has there's like a whole database that connects the Polin Museum, the Jewish Historical Museum, and they have a wonderful, wonderful database. It's in Polish, but what I do is I just found the words for artist and artwork in Polish, and I just put it into the database, and it's like Candyland. You just spend days there.
Because someone is asking, where is the bulk of his surviving paintings located?
Well, that's a good question too. Many of them are in Poland. There's actually, if anyone here is with the Polin Museum, the picture of him dressed as a Polish nobleman, which for many, many years was considered lost, and all we have is a black and white copy of it,
right,
was actually found and donated to the Polin Museum, I believe, a year ago, maybe even less. And it's now going to have pride of place in that gorgeous museum. Anyone who's not been to Warsaw, if you go, that's a must-go place. So that was just, a lot of it is in private hands. He wasn't that well known an artist for many, many years. For those of us living in Israel, you go to the Israel Museum, and it arrived in 1938 or 39 to the Israel Museum. What's so incredibly touching about the Yom Kippur painting arriving, it's kind of the transition of one great Jewish world to another. Because as it was arriving to the Tel Aviv Museum, it was bought in an auction in Nazi Berlin. And I forgot the name of the collector. He ships it to Tel Aviv. It's put on display in the old museum, the Tel Aviv Museum. As that's happening, the great Jewish community of more than 3 million Jews was on the threshold of being destroyed. And this new Jewish community, the state of Israel, which had not yet been born, but still creating an art collection, gets this great piece of work. So it's like a transition of one great Jewish people culture to another. So that's there. There are quite a few of his works in Warsaw. I believe that one of his works, the Krakow Museum, a wonderful museum, is actually hanging in front of one of the paintings of Jan Matejko. So here we have these two great Polish masters, one in front of the other. Israel Museum has the bride, not the bride, the wedding, the Jewish wedding. And I think there's 4 of them on display in the Tel Aviv Museum. It's really beautiful to go see them there. And the rest, I think, are private collections, but I could be wrong.
Well, some people are actually writing in the chat. So if anybody's interested, Tel Aviv Museum published a book about him with many illustrations.
Yes, 1891. 1991.
And Yona
they
is writing in Hebrew, Yona Mazor, that you must know because she wrote to you in Hebrew, that she has a book that was published when his stone was revealed in Krakow. So we also have that.
Wow.
As well. Somebody's writing the National Museum. That's Yona. I'll send you the chat afterwards. The National Museum of Warsaw. Now I'm just going to ask out in the world here. There was a Nadine Gottlieb that joined us not too long ago. I don't know if she's still with us, but if she is, I'd love to maybe, if she's connected to the story, to invite her to say hello. But I'm not sure if she's here still. So we're just waiting. Oh, okay. She sent her phone number, Yona.
By the way, for the Hebrew speakers, there is a wonderful, wonderful show that's online. It's called The Last Gottlieb. It was put on by Israel Channel 11 about 6 years ago.
Right.
Which, get a hanky if you're going to watch it because you're going to be crying.
Yeah.
A beautiful show about the connection between Yoel and how, slowly, slowly they made the connections. They found his girlfriend. They found his aunt's sisters who are living, or the sister and their daughters living in Paris. It's a really touching film. And the other one is a very old film from '79, which you could still find online, of kind of an interview with Batsheva Sheflan, the granddaughter of Laura. And it's also a very beautiful film. It shows a very passionate side. And I think you can't talk about Maurycy Gottlieb without seeing him as a very passionate, romantic young artist, very intense, drawing and painting and ruled by his heart and his emotions, a real artist. And I don't think you can analyze him in a cold, clinical, academic way. He wasn't a cold academic. He was a passionate young man.
I see that somebody else is writing, Joy is writing that Jerry Malinowski wrote a book on Gottlieb, published in 1997 in Warsaw. So if anyone is interested, it's in Polish and English. Somebody asked about the film. I can put the name in, and you can find it on YouTube. It is in Hebrew, but I think it has.
Actually, I tried to find it in English and I wasn't successful. If you just go
Yeah,
into
it must have
translator,
a few
folks.
captions though. So it's called The Last Gottlieb. You just have to look for it that way. And
Right. Or go into Google Translate and write The Last
exactly
Gottlieb, cut and paste, stick it in YouTube, and you'll find it. And it does have English subtitles.
right. Yeah, and of course, Yona's also writing that again in Hebrew, that it was that the stone was revealed 13 years afterwards. Another thing
That's
that I remember
exactly
about
13 years. That's
yeah,
that
that
and
something
it's also
mystic. Yeah,
it's also like the farthest back place in the cemetery. You have to ship all the way back to get to it. And Jan Matejko actually saw his funeral procession, saw, Jewish people bent over in sorrow going to the cemetery, and he joined them. He didn't realize that his student had died, and he actually came to his memorial. Yes, so, and again, that is only written in Polish. I mean, you will find in Jewish cemeteries in Poland, Polish and usually something in Hebrew. Here it's only in Polish.
his stone only has Polish. There are no initials in Hebrew. Nothing.
Nothing.
Wow.
And I actually was there. For those of you who have been, it's again, even in death, this he's our brother, our countryman, taken from us, and who is he? Who does he really belong to? And the answer is kind of everybody, really kind of everybody. And one of the saddest things about Gottlieb, he was such a genius, and he was changing, as young men do. If you see the works of Manet and all of these great impressionists, if you see the works around the same time that they were creating, they were also very influenced by the Academy. And then they, burst out, and what we get is Impressionism. And I think Maurycy Gottlieb was also on that track.
Yeah.
But he died at the age of 23.
That 50 Jewish artists you should know includes Gottlieb. So we have.
Oh, definitely.
Someone again is asking about recording. Yes, this is being recorded. You'll get a post-program email with a link. Go to the Ghetto Fighters House YouTube channel. It's in our chat. We put it a few times, and you will find all of our Talking Memory programs there. So yes, Liz was recorded.
Wonderful. And I want to say one more thing.
Yes.
Sometimes people say that he was the only great Polish artist. He opens the door for a whole generation of great Polish artists. A lot of them, their work was destroyed by the Nazis, but there were great Polish art movements. There was the young can't pronounce it, young artists from Lodz who are even creating artwork in Lodz Ghetto. There's all these great artists at work. There's great Polish artists who go off and make a school called the Paris School. There was a very active Jewish art movement in Poland before the war. And he's really opened the door up for them. He was the pathfinder for these artists. And you could find a lot of their work also if you go to the Polin, the joint archives of the Zich and the Zich and the Polin Museum. They have a lot of their work there. You have to do a little searching, but you can find their work, and it's just really beautiful.
So I just put up the YouTube channel again for anybody who is interested. You can copy it and watch Liz in a few days. It may take a week because of everything that we're doing this week. I want to remind everybody, first of all, thank you, Liz. Thank you again.
Thank you, everyone.
Again. It's never boring, even if you got lost and you disappeared and you came back and we couldn't hear you. The program was amazing.
I forgot some words. I forgot some
words. That's fine. I really want to thank you again for bringing this artist to our global audience. And I want to thank our audience for coming today, because it really is a special Sunday for so many people, and to be a part of this program. I want to remind everyone that we have our programs throughout the week, Days of Remembrance, with the final concluding program on Thursday at 4:45. And like I said, go to our Facebook page, Ghetto Fighters House, and you can look for all the information there. It's also in the link here. And I want to say goodbye to everyone and thank you for coming and thank you for everything that you wrote. If you take a look quickly at the chat, Liz, you can see all the thank yous and thank yous and thank yous. Many, many thank
you,
yous.
everyone.
So
thank you so
enjoy
much.
them. Enjoy them.
I don't even know how to find them. So
in the chat. I'll send it to you.
Okay, wonderful. Everyone, have a wonderful evening. It's my husband's birthday. I'm going to go and have a cake with him now.
Go celebrate. Okay. Thanks again.
Bye-bye, everyone. Bye-bye.